Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Good morning to everyone present here. It is my pleasure to introduce Assistant Professor Soumya Sridhar from the Department of Metallurgical and Material Engineering at the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. She completed her integrated M.Tech and PhD from IIT Madras in 2018, where her research focused on developing thermodynamic databases for multi-component nitride systems using the CalFAT method and ab initio calculations. She later joined the University of Pittsburgh as a postdoctoral associate and subsequently served as a research assistant professor until 2024. Her research there focused on alloy design, functionally graded materials for additive manufacturing, post-heat treatment studies, and the development of thermodynamic databases for chloride salts and transition metal borides using the CalFAT-based ICME framework. Her expertise lies in phase diagrams, thermophysical property prediction, alloy design, and advanced manufacturing. We are honored to have you with us here, ma'am. Please and join me in welcoming ma'am.
Good morning, everyone. So I hope I am audible. So as your fellow student mentioned, I'm Soumya Sridhar, kind of a new joinee to this institute. I joined in January 2025, 26. Before that, for 1 year, I was in IIT Kanpur, you might have heard of, in UP. So I worked there for a year and then I moved to IIT Madras, which is my alma mater. So yeah, today we will be seeing something interesting about how to build new metallic alloys just with computers. So this talk will be of two parts. Like the first part will be introducing you to some of the concepts and related to material science. So my major, if you see from undergraduate to PhD postdoc, never changed. Fortunately or unfortunately, I was always been in metallurgy and material science. So today I take the pleasure in introducing something which I am enjoying from the year of 2008 till now and still keep enjoying. I would like to introduce it to you all. So that is metallurgy and materials engineering or material science and engineering. So yeah, your friend gave a very nice introduction, but still I did my undergraduate in Government College of Engineering, Salem, followed by my PhD, like integrated master's plus PhD in IIT Madras. Then I worked for a short period in IIT Madras for 6 months, then moved to University of Pittsburgh, where I was there for almost close to 6 years, where initially I was a postdoctoral associate, followed by, a tenure track assistant professor. Then I was an assistant professor in IIT Kanpur for almost close to a year and moved to IIT Madras. I mostly work on computational materials modeling and also some validation using experiments. So coming to today's talk. So everyone will accept that materials are inevitable, right? We need materials. The pen you have, the paper, the dress you wear, the bags you have, everything. But typically we can always classify them into three, right? Metals, ceramics, polymers. So in your day-to-day life, even in your home, so you have all dishes, what your mom cooks in the kitchen, which is mainly what? Either stainless steel or aluminum, right? Followed by, either the copper wires in all the wiring in your home, or the jewelry which you wear, or the steel pipes. And ceramics, these are these fancy coffee mugs, the plates, the tiles in your home, and so on. And when it comes to polymers, it's become quite important. Food grade plastics and the plastic tubes for water supply and so on. And the polystyrene boxes you take for takeouts when you buy from any hotels. So classification of materials is basically based on, this first thing is based on state, which is like solid, liquid, and gas. And solids again will be organic, which is including carbon, or inorganic, which doesn't involve carbon. And in inorganic, you have this metal ceramics and so. And in organic, you have polymers. And based on the atomic structure, we have two types. One is crystalline material, and other one is amorphous. So crystalline meaning you have long range order in the material. Amorphous being you don't have a long range order in the material. So I'd like to introduce you to one important thing here, how the evolution of material requirements has changed like, how the evolution has happened for the material requirements in our daily life with a very essential example right now, which is a cell phone. So how many of you have seen this cell phone? Right? This model, right? The Nokia 1100, which came in 2003, right? Now where are we? iPhone 17, right? So the flagship color, right? The orange one this time, right? So what happened in the evolution from Nokia 1100, the most robust and rigid phone, to the iPhone that we have right now? Let's see how the material is changing. So in 2003, when Nokia 1100 was introduced, it had just a plastic housing, right? Followed by a screen which had a monochrome display, a very small screen only, right? 1.4. Today we have 6-inch and 8-inch and so on. Electrical components that so on, and finally a BL5C battery. If people remember, sometimes there were even troubles with BL5C battery, even swelling, right? So it's a lithium-ion battery. Okay, now with this, it is a chemical cocktail right now. Why we can call it a chemical cocktail? Your touchscreen has indium. Your speaker microphone, the microphone has nickel, praseodymium, neodymium, gadolinium, terbium, dysprosium. All these are F block if you are studying the chemistry one. So this is F block, this is D block. Battery is it was a lithium ion battery back there. Now it's lithium, cobalt, nickel, sometimes even manganese. Display is lanthanum, again praseodymium, europium, gadolinium, terbium and dysprosium. Electronics is nickel, gallium, tantalum, and casing is either mostly magnesium casing, some even aluminum casing. Because if you want to get those nice flagship colors, they go for typically controlled oxidation of aluminum. So if you remember, in one of the previous models it was a lavender color iPhone, right? This time it is orange and so on. So let's, with all this basic introduction about the need of materials in our daily life, let's go to what is material science and engineering. It's an interdisciplinary stream, and we have 3 functionalities to be done here: designing, choosing, using. We can design or something new, or choose from something that is already available, and use it. Eventually it has to be used. Interdisciplinary, what does it mean? Let's have it a little interactive. So interdisciplinary. Yeah, different parts of science and engineering. But how do you think, how many parts of different science and different engineering fields, right? Electrical, bio, all this. So how many fields might be interdisciplinary with material science? Any guess in numbers? Right. How many do you think? There's mechanical, there's electrical and so on, right? Any numbers? Random guesses? 7? Okay. I think she might be a little close, but yeah. So, yeah. So we have these many fields that are in interdisciplinary with material science, okay? And each field has its own. Let's start with the top one, physics. So you have semiconductors and magnetic devices. You need material there. And in chemistry, it's catalysis and electrochemistry. In biology and healthcare, basically bioengineering, it's for implants, right? You have magnesium implants, you have titanium. If anyone has any bone problem, they keep titanium rods, right, these days. So titanium implants, tissue engineering. In mechanical, nevertheless, has very close interaction with material science, in manufacturing and so on. And chemical engineering, batteries, a field with a very big scope. And membranes also, fuel cells, everything comes in that. And electrical engineering, wearable devices, right, including the smartwatch, everything, you need a particular material, right? Otherwise, if this strap, everything might degrade. Then aerospace engineering, that will be the case study we will be seeing in the next talk. And finally, in civil, actually the most important in civil is earthquake resistant, fire resistant, okay, and sustainable buildings. All this requires materials. So yeah, so this is having 2 components here. Science and engineering Are they same or different? Different. In what sense? Application. Science is knowing what is happening. Engineering is applying what you learned from science. Same holds true with material science. But if you see many department names in this country in different colleges, I'll just take the case of IITs only. So some call it material science and engineering. Some, like ours, like IIT Madras, we call it metallurgical and materials engineering. Some call it metallurgical engineering and material science. But eventually, there is a science and also engineering, and all our researchers will be either involving science or engineering or both. Okay? So in material science, you are going, so mainly it might involve, the fundamental principles. Fundamental principles generally will boil down in material science to mostly physics and chemistry. Okay? So it is like there is a structure and you have a property, how you want to correlate. That is the science. For example, let's say investigating the underlying physics and chemistry that govern how atoms bond. You might have studied about bonding, right? Ionic bonding, covalent bonding, and so on. How atoms bond and how the structure, the microstructure evolves. So it is like basically discovering why a material behaves like this. Understanding why. Okay, answering the question why. But in engineering, it is application. No looking at why or so on. I have this problem. I need to have a material to solve this. It is application, right? So in this case, it is structure, property, and processing because I need an end product. So I need to fabricate it, manufacture it, right? So I need an end product. So here it is structure, property, and processing. And it applies. So it is application. There it is understanding why. Here it is application for a specific set of properties to meet the societal needs. That is like, for example, if let's say someone is, someone is digging some geological application. They're digging a mine. So you need some heavy machinery with the proper material so that they don't break down easily, right? Right? You need a certain type of material which is strong enough and it is having the right wear resistance so that it doesn't break down easily. So there it is application. So now we can, there are two components to research here. One is using computers, one is getting your hands dirty, which is experiments, right? Certain research goes with only experiments, certain only with computation. But what I'm going to talk today is an intersection between both because both are complementary to each other. So that is the whole motto of our talk today. So first I'll talk about why we need materials modeling for improving our life. Can you see something faint behind this? Broken ship means what? Okay. What do you remember by broken ship? Titanic. Correct. This is actually a real picture of Titanic from 1912. Okay. You can see the state of a ship, right? It has broken literally into two pieces. Most of you might have watched the movie also, right? So this is the collapse of RMS Titanic in 1912. Okay? It, basically what happened? It hit an iceberg. It hit a iceberg. Now, if I take someone, call someone here, keep a piece of ice and tell them to hit with a hammer. What in this classroom? Which one will break? Ice or hammer? We are in room temperature. Assuming this room is now 25 degrees C. Now, making you wear something and so on, I take you to minus 10, minus 20 degrees Celsius. I give you the same scenario. I give you a hammer and tell you to hit ice. Now what will break? Ice or hammer? If it is ice, Titanic would not have broken. It's the hammer. Let's see how. But before that, now this is an incident where it hit the iceberg in 1912. Titanic broke. We got a movie also. Similar one happened in 2022. Close to the Norwegian coast, right? one Alaskan cruise, I guess. Yeah, sorry. A Norwegian cruise off the Alaskan coast. It hit a Hubbard Glacier, similar to, something like an iceberg. Glaciers are also quite huge. And Alaska is filled with a lot of glaciers. And it just went for repair. It didn't break. Right? So, what improved? Some property there has improved. Right? That's why from 1912, when Titanic broke into two pieces, it has evolved to just a small repair happening in Seattle. So that property, so this is what I was trying to explain. So at room temperature, a steel hammer will break ice, right? But at sub-zero temperatures, when a ship hits a iceberg, or as I told you, if I take you to minus 20 or minus 40 degrees Celsius, and if you hit the hammer with ice, the steel hammer will break. In this case, iceberg broke the ship. And that is because of this property called ductile to brittle transition temperature, or also known as impact transition temperature. So there are three types of things we have to look here. If you are testing a material, trying to break a material, let me take a simple metallic material, steel, right? At room temperature, it will be a fracture something like this, right? At very high temperature, you see it will be very pointed because the material softens when you increase, because eventually it has to melt. The bonds in the solid has to break, then only it will become liquid, right? So, this will become more sharp. This will be like, this is actually similar to this is the ductile fracture, which is happening at room temperature. Now see what happens at sub-zero. What is the difference between sub-zero and room temperature fracture? I think, I'm sorry, maybe you can move here if you want, yeah. So what is happening? The difference? The feature. So one has something called cup and cone, right? Like, and there is something here called necking. If necking happens, what does it mean? It's like, okay, I give you a piece of glass. It immediately, a glass tube, and I tell you to break it. You will easily break it. Why? Because you don't have any necking or anything which will delay the fracture. And that is called a brittle fracture. Now, if I give you a aluminum pipe, which is quite soft enough, which you can pull it, and so it will take time. It will be like pulling, and there will be some necking. It will take some time for you. So that is actually nothing but the ductility. Right? I hope you have studied something about malleability and ductility, right? And malleability is for sheets, ductility is for pulling wires. Basically, if you take the case of a copper or an aluminum tube, you try to pull it, you are delaying it. Why? Because it forms a neck, and from the neck it has to break. But in the case of glass, it immediately breaks. Now, steel has to break like the example I gave you for aluminum, which is happening at room temperature, it necks. But you see, it's the same when you go to sub-zero, like minus 20 or minus 40 degrees Celsius. It is breaking like glass. So this transition is called ductile to brittle transition. So this is how you see, like at 80 Kelvin, which is in sub-zero, it is breaking literally like glass, but here it actually didn't break. 300 Kelvin is room temperature. It is still stuck. It needs still more to pull and remove it. So the thing here is, now why Titanic broke? Because its ductile to brittle transition was, very close to room temperature. It should have been much low, right? But it was higher, because of which it hit the iceberg, it broke. Now with advent of new manufacturing techniques and computational modeling, it has been made sure that the ductile to brittle transition has been pushed down, so that when a ship, Norwegian cruise, hit in the Alaskan coast, there is nothing big happened and we got into repairs, because it is this property that has improved. And how? Using computational material science. So we are going to see what is computational material science. So generally, this is called a materials tetrahedron. We always in materials talk about these four things: processing, structure, property, performance. These are the pillars, right? So we have processing, we have the structure, property, performance, always this is called a materials tetrahedron, and right in middle has something known as characterization. That is, you do the experiments to understand this. So here the traditional method was experiment first and then think next. You fabricate a material, you do all the experiments, then you analyze the results. That is how the paradigm was, the research paradigm. But with the advent of higher computational power, we went into a different mode. The same processing structure property performance is there. That middle characterization got converted to 3 different items here. One, experiments. See, experiments is still completely not gone, right? We still are at least slightly dependent on experiments. Computational models for predicting properties and so on. And third is data. Data for what? Machine learning, artificial intelligence. So now we think first, in the sense we try to simulate, try to predict, and we may have to think and okay, this could be this and so on. And then we try to do experiments to validate our simulation. That is the thinking. So you see, when we first were initially, we were experimenting, then thinking. Now we are thinking and then experimenting. So that is the power, the importance of computational power here. So now we talked about structure, right? So structure again has to be classified. Structure can be classified into 4. One is subatomic level, in the atomic scale, which is what? Picometer to angstrom to picometer level, picometer to angstrom level. Atomic level, we are in like nanometer and so on, right? Then microscopic level, we go into micrometers, and we have the macroscopic level in meters, right? So this is the length scale in which you can classify structures. And in the second way is classification in terms the processing. So structure, we saw. Next, classification of processing. So in materials, there are 3 major methods, the traditional methods. One is casting, that is liquid metals are poured into a mold, right? So jewelry, how it is made. Molten gold is poured into a mold, is poured into a mold, and you get the design you want. Okay, that is casting. Next one is powder processing. Another one is like you can take metal powders, compact them into a shape, and you put it in a furnace at some high temperature so that the powder particle fuse, which initially it will be individual powder particles, but after you put it in a furnace and you fuse it, it becomes a solid form. That is powder processing, that is the thing. Third one is bulk deformation. So bulk deformation, as you can see here, you keep a piece and you put a mold with the metal piece, it is at high temperature so that it will deform to the shape of the mold. Rolling, you might have seen, like you take a sheet and you want to reduce the thickness of the sheet. Then you put 2 rolls above and below and you pull it. Wire, the malleability what you talked about, right? That is for sheets. And then for pulling of wires, right? You will put it in a small thing which has the required diameter and you pull the wire, right? So these are all bulk deformation. And something which I have not mentioned here is now recently known as additive manufacturing, that is 3D printing, where layer by layer, all these bulk deformation are different. There you fabricate components layer by layer and get the shape you want. So for very complex shapes, that is quite important, 3D printing. And in terms of properties, this is the most primary. So structure we saw, the classification. Processing we saw, the classification. Now the property classification, right? There is no classification on performance. Performance means you have to perform. Like, getting high marks, it's something like that. So when it comes to properties, so first is the mechanical. The first and foremost thing we think as metallurgists is, what is the strength? For anything and everything, it is strength, followed by ductility, right? So strength is here. I hope you might have learned few parts of this, the Young's modulus, where you are in the elastic regime. Then you go into the plastic regime. This transition area is the yield strength. And when so what is the strain up to which, after which it fractures, that's your ductility, right? The strain at the point of fracture is your ductility, right? So these are the very important mechanical properties. So we have Young's modulus, which is important. Yield strength also important, ultimate tensile strength or the ultimate strength which is important, and ductility. So you can see how important mechanical properties are. Followed by other sorts of properties, electrical and magnetic. Thermal is another very important property. Thermal properties, heat capacity, right? Latent heat of fusion, enthalpies. All these are very important quantities. Then optical properties like the refractive index and all these things. And finally, response to chemical environments like corrosion. The next one is corrosion resistance and oxidation resistance. Like these are all the chemical interactions with the surrounding environment. So with all this, we will come to what is computational material science. It is use of computational tools to reduce the product development. So a guess about what will be the typical product development cycle time? 5 years is what we have achieved only last 5 years ago. It used to be 25 years. So, okay, let me put a situation like this. Since you answered, you developed a material. Let's say for maybe a car body, let's say. Can it be used directly just because you, what needs to be done? Tests and, okay. So there is one important word here, qualification. We have a lot of standards. You might have heard ISO, BIS standards and so on. So the major bottleneck in most of our product development cycle is getting it qualified. Because without a qualification certificate, nobody will buy your material to be used in their application. Even if you buy a small, a block, it always comes with a QC, right? A quality check certificate. So that is actually, so the total product development cycle is between 20 to 30 years. Now, the main aim is using computational material science, we want to reduce this product development cycle. So for which we will use computers to do the simulations, few experimental trials to basically validate our simulations, followed by fabrication and application. Okay. So multi-scale modeling is the primary. Why I am calling this multi-scale? Now already we saw structure has different scales, right? Subatomic, atomic, micro scale and macro scale. Okay. So here we are going to use all the length scales in a material, okay, to get this part done. So we will see what is this multi-scale. Materials are hierarchical, right? From atoms, so from the orbitals, you go to atoms, to the dendrites in the microstructure, the macrostructure, and this is the component, right? So you see the lengths here. This is 10 to the power minus 15 to 12, minus 8 to 10, minus 4 to 7, minus 3 to 1 meter, and this is several, component scale is always several meters, right? Okay, so since materials are hierarchical, which is actually a multi-level structure, we need, our design should be such that we cannot model everything with, we cannot model all this length scale with just one model. So we need multiple models. So that's what we are going to see, what are the multiple models available for this computational materials modeling. So before we go into that, there is a nice movie which we can see, a short movie, which is a scale bridging journey from macro scale to a nanocosmos. So what we are going to take here is this very important component called turbine blade, right? Turbine blade used in jet engines, right? Any hot component, you use turbine blades, right? And you see these holes here, what are they for? Cooling, correct, right? And inside they will have some lattice structures basically for also cooling, right? Now, they are fabricated using something known as nickel-based superalloys. Ni is the symbol for nickel, right? Nickel-based superalloys. And why these are called superalloys? Is because they can, so you always know for a certain material or any material, let's take pure iron, whatever is the strength at room temperature will not be at high temperature. It degrades faster. But these alloys are superalloys because they can retain their strength at high temperature. And that's why this is used in very high temperature meaning up to 1000 degrees Celsius I am talking about. Okay. So, and these are multi-component. Now, what is this multi-component? Nickel base. It has almost 10 to 15 elements from the periodic table. It's not just only nickel. Nickel is the base, possibly some 50, close to 40 to 50 atomic percent. You will have quite a bit of amount of chromium, cobalt, aluminum, titanium, niobium, tantalum, tungsten, rhenium, carbon, etc., etc., and etc. Okay, each element for different application. That's the beauty of materials. There are 10 different elements. If nothing, even the small amount of carbon that is added to that material is important, without which the material is failed. Every component is important. So, and they are used in jet engines, gas turbines for aero and jet engines, basically to withstand the high mechanical loads. So, given all this, I think I should play something so that you can get little refreshed. Okay, so this is a turbine blade. This is the macro structure of the turbine blade. And we are going to the top portion of the turbine blade. And as we zoom in, we are getting something known as, this is your microstructure. Right? Please start looking into the scale bar here. Now we are in 200 micrometer. Zooming in further and further, we are going to 50 micrometer. This is all microstructure. And then we go for, so this is having like a composite matrix and precipitate. So this is the precipitate gamma prime particle. So you see the length scale keeps on decreasing, now has gone up to from 2 micron to 500 nanometers. And here there is a stop. We are not zooming in. Why it is? Because we want to know what does these two phases are. Because you see a dark phase and a light phase. You can check the composition. Okay. So here this is the distribution of aluminum, distribution of nickel, distribution of tantalum, and then next would be titanium. Okay, and so this is for the gray phase. Now what about the bright phase? It's consisting of cobalt, chromium, and this should be rhenium and tungsten. So a small stop here. Okay. So what do you see from this is that even though we have multiple elements, this is a two-phase microstructure they call it, right? You have two phases, a dark phase and a bright phase. The dark phase has a certain elemental distribution with nickel, aluminum, tantalum and titanium, and the dark phase and the bright phase has cobalt, chrome, rhenium and tungsten. This is a composite microstructure, right? So this is called a multi-phase microstructure. That is, this is two phases, plus apart from other phases will be there in minor amounts. So this we generally called a multi-phase microstructure. And to achieve this multi-phase microstructure only, we go for multi-component systems. Yeah, so we are going further. Okay, now we are going still further from 100 nanometers. We are now, so what we are going to see now is how the atom is distributed in these phases. So we are now gone into the atomic scale resolution. We are now in 5 nanometers. Right? We went into 5 nanometers and this is the atomic scale. Further, what we can do is we can go into their orbital information, atomistic model. This is in picometer, angstrom to picometer scale. Okay? So this is the macro scale to nanocosmos journey, which is the, now you understood material, how hierarchical it is, that big macro scale, that few meters high, from the few meters high turbine blade, we went into the atomic orbitals in the angstrom or picometer scale, right? So, This is the reason why needed multi-scale modeling, right? And we have 4 important different scales here. One is electronic scale. Let's say consider this to be some picometer or so on. So picometer to nanometer. Nanometer to micrometer comes in atomistic scale. Micrometer to millimeter comes in microstructure scale. And millimeter to meter comes in macro scale. So we have 4 different scales here. And as I mentioned to you, all the 4 different scales have to exchange information. Okay? If you go from macro to electronic, it will be top-down approach. If you go from electronic to macro scale, it is a bottom-up approach. But both types of modeling works. So each length scale has a separate model that can be simulated. There are validated models for each length scale. And the most important thing, you see, that's why since both the approach, that's why they put two-headed arrow here, double-headed arrow. They didn't put a single-headed arrow. And secondly, there should be structured information transfer. That is the success of computational materials modeling, where you should have structured information transfer between different length scales. So we'll go one by one little bit about each length scale. So first, for the electronic length scale, the technique is called ab initio DFT. So ab initio means from the scratch. No assumptions, just a few assumptions, but from the scratch. What you just need to give as input is the distribution of your atoms. That's all. You need not give what is the heat capacity, what is the latent heat, nothing. Just distribution of atoms needs to be given, and their atomic orbital information. And so we use this something known as density functional theory. It is a quantum mechanical method used for electronic and structural properties. Electronic meaning like band gap and in semiconductors and so on. And structural properties like if there is a crystal structure, what is its lattice parameters, right? You might have studied about some close-packed crystal structures and so on. So all those things can be calculated here. And this is only based on the fundamental laws of physics. Just the fundamental laws of physics. So as I told you, the input is the atomic distribution and the orbital information for the atoms. That's it. No property involved here. But the biggest trouble here is it can handle only few hundreds of atoms, and you need high computational power. So coming to computational power, I should say that in IIT Madras, we have very good supercomputers here, 2 to 3 supercomputers. So where we run our simulations, okay, with several crores and petaflops of memory, right? And but still, for using this type of techniques, right, we still need to expand the computational power, okay? So, or we need to, modify the model in such a way that it can handle more atoms. So this is mainly to predict material properties of metals, semiconductors, and insulators. So the next one is the next length scale, which is in atomistic, right? The second length scale, we are going to use something known as molecular dynamics. Also a very basic technique, which is going to use Newton's laws of motion. Newton's laws of motion applied to atoms. So that is what is the basic of molecular dynamics simulation. It is basically going to track the position and velocity of atoms over time, okay? And also the interactions. So some of the applications, and here the most important is you need to know what are the forces acting between atoms. So there, as I told you, it doesn't need any property information, just the orbital information. It's not like that here. Here we need to know what is the force acting between the atoms and so on. So that is termed as force fields. So here force fields is important. And this is like for investigating how molecules move in liquids and gases, and how chemical reactions occur, and some energy levels. So the next scale, microstructure scale, that is, the dendrites and all this that we saw, we are using something known as phase field modeling. So this is for simulating the evolution of microstructure and their transformations. And it is actually using this very nice approach called diffuse interface approach. Now let's take the example of a very simple phase transformation, which is solidification. Liquid transforming to solid. When now liquid is transforming to solid, how many phases can be there? 2. Liquid, solid, right? Liquid is, so if you take let's consider this black as liquid and the white as solid, right? You have the liquid and the solid, but there is something you can assume with your this imagination that it will be like liquid is transformed and it is very sharp, right? There is only liquid and solid, that's what you are assuming here, right? But actually that's not the real case. It is actually a diffuse thing, which means there is liquid, there is solid, and there is liquid plus solid in between, and that's called a diffuse interface approach. And phase field modeling uses a diffuse interface approach, and the main motive here is to model this interface. So it's again a computationally intensive technique, and but it is very useful for solid liquid transformation, solid solid transformation, and also for understanding the fracture behavior. So lastly, the macro scale, might have heard of finite element modeling. So this is actually like, like it is a numerical technique used for, so let's say, so look at this figure here. Even though it is such a big component, you are not taking it as a single component. You are meshing it and making it into different nodes, and you are doing the simulation in each node. So that is what here we use for FEM, that is the finite element method. This is to mainly predict how materials will behave under different conditions, the failure mechanisms, and also developing new materials. So in all these cases, what I keep telling is, it is computationally intensive. So we always need high computational power to get computational material science implemented in a way that is useful for us. Okay? So with this is the last part. I would like to introduce here to another concept called CalFAD, which is in none of these length scales. Okay, why I am introducing this concept is because this will be the basis for the next talk, the next study, the case study we will be talking about. So it's an acronym for calculation of phase diagrams, and it is a scaleless thermodynamic information. There is no scale. It is not in electronic, it is not in atomistic, microstructure, or macro scale. It is a bridge. It's basically a bridge that translates this electronic level information, that is there from the electronic scale, to a component performance in the macro scale. Okay, and it is, you can even call it as a thermodynamic DNA for a material. So how are the connections made here? It cannot keep hanging there, right? So it uses data from DFT and molecular dynamics, which is the electronic and atomistic modeling which we saw, the length scale. It takes information from that for predicting the properties. Okay, it is needed for like something like enthalpy of formation or enthalpy of mixing, which does not exist or difficult to measure. For those cases, we use the electronic and atomistic scale modeling here. But where CalFAD will give info, so these are like CalFAD is taking information. Now where CalFAD will give information, which is the microstructure modeling, which is the phase field modeling that we saw. So it provides the potentials, the forces, the mobility, that is how fast the material can, atoms can move, all this information that is needed for microstructure, evolution, grain growth, precipitate coarsening, and so on. So if you want something is growing, means what? Basically atoms are diffusing. So diffusion is, so this involves a certain time scale also here, right? This type of, so this gives information about the energy differences, the composition differences, the potential differences needed for the diffusion to happen. Then lastly, it feeds also into the finite element method, the last modeling here, which is needed for accurate welding, casting, etc. This is by providing temperature dependent properties like the thermal properties which we spoke about, that is heat capacity, latent heat, and the fraction of phases, and so on. So with this, I end my first talk, maybe closely on time. So I would be happy to entertain some questions. Thank you. Yes. So let's say, so you can understand that materials contain several grains, right? So the grain, let's say it was 1 micrometer when you take it at room temperature, one material. Now you put it in a furnace and take it to 1000 degrees Celsius. The grain, so what happened? The grain boundaries start moving, because of which the three small grains in the room temperature becomes one big grain at high temperature. That is called grain growth. Yeah. Superalloys. Okay. So, okay, there are several ways to fabricate. Casting is the first route they were using. Right now, it is 3D printing or additive manufacturing that is being used. Casting, basically, in superalloy, you need something called single crystal. What does single crystal mean? You take only one grain and allow it to grow in one direction. So, that was the common tech still used, but additive manufacturing is also being used.